All right, so the thing that I'm going to be talking about is prioritization. Last month we talked about how we want to get prioritization guidance to all of you. Prioritization is very important. One of the things that we were talking about is where are all the resources, where is the funding, why can't Phil do all of this? It's very important for us to prioritize things based on a couple of different factors. So we've broken out prioritization into a macro level, so it's a larger scale. Which websites, which programs should I engage with? A meso level, which is which areas inside of a website. So you can think about this, for example, if you were Amazon.com or some other e-commerce website, you would want to make sure that your users can check out and that that process is accessible, and also that the process of them finding products is accessible. Those are important decisions to make when prioritizing at the meso level. And also we have at the micro level. And we've talked about our severity scale before. In fact, in our presentation with Ryan Wells, we referenced it heavily. We have a prioritization scale, which is based on the severity of different accessibility bugs and how those will impact the users. And we use that to make decisions on which things we need to fix first. So prioritization impacts what we focus on and is a strategy we have really implicitly used on our team, but we want to put this guidance out there so that you guys can use it and so that you can kind of understand how we've been operating a little bit more clearly. So can you go to the website, Nate? Sorry to make you run. All right. So I talked a little bit about the different levels of prioritization. I'm going to read off these bullet points now, though. The macro level of prioritization is how we decide which digital systems or content to engage with. So that's which sites, courses, programs, or vendors. The meso prioritization level is how to decide which aspects or context of a system to focus review or remediation efforts on. This is which processes within a site, program, course, or vended technology. And then again, the micro level is how we decide which bugs to focus on. So frequently when we're doing accessibility reviews, we will find a bunch of different types of accessibility bugs. And how we think about the micro level is the impact they'll have on end users. So I kind of want to briefly walk through each of these then. Do you mind scrolling down a little bit more? One thing that I should mention is that the first area of prioritization is if you ever receive a complaint from a student, faculty, staff, guest, or visitor with a disability, that is the first thing that you should prioritize. And there are a lot of different ways that you might receive a complaint or an inquiry. Some of that might be through the RCPD contacting you. We receive stuff sometimes through web access at msu.edu. We also have an inaccessible digital content report form. I know a lot of y'all have accessibility statements on your websites and have a contact person that you can contact in relation to those statements. So another way you might be contacted as a web accessibility policy liaison, either by our office or maybe someone with a disability will find your contact info on this website. And then, a final way to do that would be for a student to go through the Office of Institutional Equity. This is the first area of prioritization. If you have any kind of complaint where someone cannot access something, there's a barrier to their access, that is something that you should focus your energies on now. We've talked about prioritization a little bit through our purchasing process. These are some bullet points which kind of describe what high priority things are. Things which have a large audience, things which are required for course or educational programs, things that have a high degree of educational opportunity or benefit through technology, systems that have no easily identifiable alternative and no commercially available, or if there is a commercially available alternative to your system, then it's also a high priority. So if you scroll down a little bit more, we made a matrix for how you can think about priority at the macro level. So there's a couple of different factors or questions that you can ask yourself. What is the number of users? Is it required for participation in or completion of coursework or educational programs, services, or activities? Is there an alternative service, program, system, or process that is accessible? Is there a way to provide a timely accommodation without adversely affecting the experience, opportunity, or dignity of a person with a disability? And then if you go back up to the top, we have different answers based on priority level. This, again, mirrors our severity scale on the micro level. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The basic idea of this matrix is if you kind of run your thinking through this and you're looking at a new system, you can kind of ask yourself these questions and then choose either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or unknown, and use this to come up with a number that will be indicative of the priority that item should be given. This is useful in relation when you have two things that you could be looking at. So it's a relative measurement, and it's not designed to give specific numbers when we are thinking about prioritization. So we're hoping that this will be useful for the macro prioritization level, which is, again, how you decide which systems, content, or programs or services to focus on. Are there any questions about the macro level of prioritization? Oh gosh, I'm not sure whether to be like proud or confused or what. Anyway, again, before you're doing that macro level of prioritization, just consider if there is a person with a disability who may have a complaint. All right, so the meso level, this is the one that I was told might be a little bit more confusing. This is how we decide which areas to focus on within a digital system. When you're doing accessibility review and remediation, it can sometimes be hard to do a remediation of an entire website within a period of time that makes sense. So how we think about this is which aspects of the system are going to be the most important for a person to be able to use. This might be, again, if we use the e-commerce website, checkout process, being able to explore and find items. Those are two extremely important processes, and since the goal of every e-commerce business is to make money, you want to be sure that you're able to make money with persons with disabilities. So there are certain features within systems which may be less used. If you go into D2L or some systems, if you're an instructor in D2L, you may not use all the features within D2L. You may use a small subset of those features. That's personally true of my instructional strategies for my class. But for meso prioritization, we really recommend thinking about these different kinds of data points. The analytics at the page level, so which pages are being most accessed. If you have that information, that is extremely useful information to think about. If you're using analytics to make these kinds of decisions, though, you should think about how a page might lead to a process. Because if a page leads to a process, then it's important that we make that whole process accessible if that's the most widely accessed page. You can also do usability testing, or if you can't afford to do usability testing, you could consider doing experience mapping. There are Usability Accessibility Research and Consulting Center in the crowd. If you need to do any kind of usability testing to figure out where how people are using your systems or where they're going when they're in them, that might be a good thing to think about. You could also, a low-cost solution would be just to do surveying. And I reference experience mapping. Is anyone in here familiar with that term? That's just the idea of going through what the experience that someone might have, just kind of like sketching it all out in a visual way. It's a very useful thing to think about when we're designing processes and policies and things. If you're research-minded, you could do experience sampling studies or diary studies. And the most informal way to gather this meso prioritization decision-making data is to just get feedback from your users, or if you anecdotally hear feedback from users, you can understand that those might be areas that are widely used if you cannot do any kind of formal research. So that's a way to determine which aspects of the system to spend the most time on when you're reviewing and when you're remediating for accessibility. And we find this to be very important because it's very hard to look at, each of us in here probably has many websites, and then how do we focus on the areas that are going to be the most high impact? Are there questions about meso prioritization? Cool. All right, so micro prioritization, we've already talked about this before, and I'm going to link a copy of a PDF to our severity scale. This is a scale that is designed to kind of mirror the JIRA levels. And the goal of it is to just kind of denote whether something is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Level 4 in the accessibility severity scale is a blocker. That means it prevents access to core processes or many secondary processes. I should go back a step. If you are classifying a bug, an individual bug might relate to a WCAG criterion and something on the page that isn't working as it is expected to work. So let's say there's a keyboard trap on your website. That would probably be a level 4 blocker because that is preventing people from accessing core aspects of the site or getting out of core aspects to go into other aspects of the site. Level 3, critical, prevents access to some secondary processes, makes it difficult to access core processes or many secondary processes. We're kind of just scaling down a little bit, but that's also still an important thing. When we're working with vendors, we usually tell them to work on the level 4 and the level 3 items first, because we find that those are very important to hit. Level 2 is major, makes it inconvenient to access core processes or many secondary processes. And level 1 is minor, makes it inconvenient to access isolated processes. And usually when we do accessibility reviews, we also use level 0 for usability observations. We particularly think about that in the context of a person with a disability. So, an example of a usability observation is, well, if there's a bunch of if there's, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. A usability observation would be something that could negatively affect someone's user experience, but may not make it to the point of largely inconveniencing them. So that's the micro level of prioritization. So again, just to review, macro is like which systems, meso is which aspects of those systems, and micro is how to kind of classify the bugs that you're finding related to accessibility. This is a tool that you guys can use. I'm really actually looking for feedback on this matrix for the macro level. This is something that we worked with by reviewing our purchasing packet and kind of getting some feedback from general counsel on. But I'm really interested in your feedback on this as well. But this is kind of how we get to think about things because we have so many different pieces of content and so many systems that come to us, and we have to kind of make these decisions in order to figure out what we get to prioritize, which is why I'm never going to be able to do all the accessibility work. There's plenty of accessibility work to go around. But are there any questions to conclude this portion?
Is this something you see being a part of 5-year plans going forward?
Oh, there's more mics, yeah. So the question was, is this something we see being part of 5-year plans moving forward? I could see this being incorporated into the 1-year review process, but I think that initially what we want to get out of this is just to give people a framework for how to make quick decisions about accessibility, so you don't have these things which are hanging over you. You feel like you have this sort of Damocles over your head with all these different systems that you have out there. And we wanted to give just a framework for how to make that feel a little bit less stressful and also more approachable. There are a lot of decisions that you get to make on a daily basis related to accessibility, which can have a positive impact on ultimately our constituencies with disabilities.